In terms of people, Norway is a pretty small country, home to only about 5.5 million individuals.
Hi, I'm Jack. Um, I found this video on YouTube and I think it's very interesting. So, I'm Norwegian, been all my life, um, and I just want to give you Norwegians' input on whatever's being said because it's interesting.
To put that into perspective, Norway has fewer people than many of the world's city-states do, such as Singapore's 6 million people or Hong Kong's nearly 7.5 million people. But while small in people, Norway is very large in land. The country has about 385,000 square kilometers worth of overall land, roughly 100.
Right. So, land size. I mean, in Europe, it's average, right? Like Germany is bigger, but Norway is a lot longer. Our coastline is just half the country.
140 times larger in geographic area than Hong Kong and roughly 464 times larger than Singapore, despite having a fewer number of people than in either. Put another way, Norway's geographic size is also roughly equivalent to Japan's.
I think that's kind of interesting. Like Japan and Norway are roughly the same size. I think that's pretty cool. Um, it's easy to compare it to, right? Because a lot of people know Japan a lot more than they know Norway. And then, but that probably includes this part, you know. So, yeah. Like we have a lot of fjords in here.
And both countries have a similar amount of mountains that cover them. And yet, Japan has 22 times more people living within its similar mountainous area than Norway. Naturally, this makes Norway one of the most sparsely populated and overall empty countries in the world. With the
Yeah, it's very empty. That's for sure. I mean, people naturally settle in settlements, right? Or, but yeah, around here, I live on the west coast, and we got some islands, and basically, you can't go from one house to the next. It'll take just, half an hour. So, yeah, we're definitely scattered, and if you're going from settled place to settled place, you need a car. I mean, most places you probably do, but it'll all be empty in between. So, yeah.
the lowest density of people that can be found anywhere in mainland continental Europe, with the northern half of the country stretching beyond the Arctic Circle in the far north with a very thin layer of topsoil above bedrock. The land
Yeah. It's all mountains. I mean, if you look out the window, it's all rocks. We got a lot of trees, but not up north, though, right? It's all rocks. So, it's a harsh climate.
land of Norway is mostly harsh, mountainous, rugged, and very cold with a short growing season. An environment that doesn't lend itself very well to sustaining large numbers of people. Only 2.2% of Norway's land is even considered arable and suitable for agriculture.
That's pretty cool, right? 2% is for food. Like, how do we sustain ourselves? How do we eat anything? Well, that's where the coastline comes in, right? Yeah. There's a lot of fish. Like, growing up, we had fish on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Mm. And, Saturday you might have a pizza or something a little bit more fancy. And Sundays, that would be, the fancy food. Like a roast or something like that. Something a bit more fancy, covered in sauce and whatnot. But always potatoes. Always. With every meal, So,
one of the lowest percentages in the world and roughly equivalent to Yemen's percentage. A mountainous country in the Arabian desert without even any rivers that's widely regarded as a failed state. This ultimately means that despite having 385,000 square kilometers of overall land, only about 7,124 square kilometers of Norway's land is
yeah. Whatever he said, numbers just fly through my head here, but this is the biggest fjord in Norway. Sognefjorden. Like you can see, it's cutting through here. and we got a lot of just inlets all over the place, and that's gonna be very important later on in the video. I've seen this video before, so.
Is suitable for agriculture, a paltry amount that is similar to the amount of arable land found in El Salvador, a country that is 16 times smaller than Norway in overall land, but which has a similar population of about 6.3 million people, because the two countries have a similar amount of arable land that they can actually use to sustain their populations with. And then, to make matters even worse for Norway, their small amounts of arable land are scattered all throughout the south of the country in small valleys in between all of their massive mountains.
Yeah. Like, this is the agriculture area near Oslo, basically. So it doesn't mean that you can't have farmland over here. I mean, I know plenty of farmers around here, but sheep, cows, what have you. But the main thing is, like, sheep, they're pretty okay with wandering the mountains and whatnot, picking up berries and bushes and stuff like that. So you can let them out in a little bit more rugged terrain. Like, there is grass, you know, but it's a lot of rocks too.
Which has always made the creation of large, integrated, and efficient farms in the country impossible.
So with all the rocks, obviously you can't drive a harvester through there, so you can't make grain. And then there's the cold, so yeah.
Its vast and wide open expanses of arable land all throughout the country, the average farm size in the United States is more than 8 times greater than that in Norway as a result. And so, American farms are more integrated, more efficient, and more productive as a result, and can simply feed many times more people. Because of these inherent disadvantages when it comes to agricultural potential, there have been expectations and assumptions made by people all throughout Norway's history that the country should naturally be poor, or at least.
Yeah. You gotta hate those assumptions, right? People just assume things when they look at something and they don't fact check. It's a little bit annoying.
Least that Norway was historically a poor country until the sudden discovery of oil changed everything in the late 1960s and paved.
Yeah. He'll get around to that. But oil is mainly the money that we have today. I mean, that's basically from oil. But that's not all. Alright, and he'll get to that in the video, but yeah.
Paved the way for Norway's currently well-known prosperity. But the interesting truth is that oil didn't actually make Norway rich. It just made Norway even richer than it already was beforehand. Contrary to popular belief, Norway has been a relatively wealthy country for most of its entire history. And it almost counterintuitively has to do exactly with the same geography that makes the country so terrible for agricultural production. There are other geographic factors that can determine the fate of nations beyond agricultural potential. And one of the biggest others is how easy it is to travel around the country's territory and conduct trade.
Yeah, travel. It's all coastline, right? So, yeah. Getting over the mountains here into Sweden and whatnot, that's just, don't do it. But, yeah, if you got a little rowboat, you can pretty much go anywhere.
Transportation across Norway by land, however, has always been very difficult. For thousands of years before modern highways and tunnels, traveling along the Norwegian west coast on foot or horse was basically impossible because of the omnipresent steep mountains and deep fjords that carved all across the landscape. But this seemingly geographic curse actually turned into one of Norway's greatest geographic blessings in disguise. Because of all the jagged fjords located all throughout the Norwegian coast, Norway is generally regarded as having by far the longest coastline anywhere in Europe, with a coastline that's more than 6.5 times longer than the United Kingdom according to the CIA World Factbook.
That's kind of funny, right? Because this is considered like a circle, and it's 6 times longer. You know? I mean, you wouldn't think of it to look at it, right? It's kind of funny.
In fact, Norway's coastline is considered to be so enormous because of all these fjords that it's ranked as having the second longest coastline of all the countries in the entire world.
Yay, second place! Woohoo!
Remaining only behind the #1 spot of Canada.
6 nætter med.
We don't need commercials.
Med familien. 4 nætter til arbejde. Det giver dig en bonus.
This has always meant that as Norway coalesced into a modern nation state, its small population was always scattered in small clusters all throughout the mountains and the fjords, separated from one another across land. Not too unlike other mountainous societies like Afghanistan or Persia. But unlike those societies deep within the interior of Eurasia, the small scattered population clusters across Norway all had easy and immediate access to the global ocean because of all of the fjords that cut deep into Norway's interior.
Okay, I got a little bit lost there. So basically, the fjords are connecting the people, even though they're scattered all over the place. Yeah.
This geography encouraged a maritime culture to develop within Norway from very early on, and the
Yeah, Vikings, boats. I mean, they figured that out pretty early. If you didn't know, Norway was settled 12,000 years ago when the Ice Age ended. Yeah, that's when people started to migrate to Norway. Fun little fact there.
fjords granted the Norwegians the ability to rapidly travel between each other's settlements by sea. Moreover, the fjords enabled easy access for traders to penetrate deep into the country's interior and get close to one of Norway's greatest natural assets, its huge forests and lumber resources. Norway has never had the largest forest in Europe. It's beaten out by many other countries with larger ones like Russia, Finland, Sweden, and even France. But
May not have the largest, but we have the most easy accessible forests. And, anywhere you go in Norway, you'll see trees. Trees and rocks. That's what we got. So, yeah. I mean, you could say, cut down the trees and make agriculture, but that doesn't work. Cold and, just harvesting and whatnot. So, trees. We can do trees.
for centuries, all throughout the Age of Sail, before the development of railroads unlocked Russia's lumber potential, Norway's lumber industry was the biggest in Europe because of how much more relatively easier it was to access their forests in the...
Yeah, biggest in Europe. Woohoo! Right? So before the railroad, when Russia and Germany got their lumber going, so the railroad, I don't know, 60s? Probably 1800s, something like that, right?
in the interior, through the fjords, and export it to markets. Norway's lumber could be felled within the interior, then cheaply and efficiently dumped into rivers and floated downstream toward the settlements and sawmills along the fjords, where sawmills powered by those same downhill rivers and their waterfalls would refine the lumber.
Look at him cranking that, huh? That's proper work right there. Yeah. It's very nice.
And the lumber could then be cheaply exported out through the fjords and onto the global market. And so until the later 19th century, when railroads fully unlocked the lumber potential of European countries with larger forests like Russia, Finland, and Sweden, these relative geographic advantages made Norway the lumber powerhouse of Europe for centuries. And the country's maritime culture enabled it to build out a world-class merchant fleet. By the time that the
World-class merchant fleet. So, England, they went all over the world and occupied and settled and whatnot. But the merchant fleet of Norway, it was, what did he say? The biggest? I don't know. But anyway, lumber and fish.
20th century rolled around, Norway already had the fourth largest merchant marine fleet in the entire world. The nature of Norway's well-connected but spread out and low-density population also encouraged two things. One, the communities were all connected to each other by the fjords and by the sea, which led to a common identity emerging between all of them despite their mountainous geography. And two, Norway's small population clusters learned early on to cooperate together on shipbuilding and construction for all of their common benefit.
Yeah, that's the thing you see about in Norway. If, people working together in a whole different fashion, people will help each other out. No questions asked, because they're all neighbors and they'll spend their entire lives next to each other. It's not like in the big cities and whatnot over in USA, right, where everybody's fighting for themselves, right? We band together and we work together a lot more.
Entire Norwegian towns would cooperate together on the construction of ships that were vital for all of their survival, and shares in the ship's ownership would be divided amongst nearly everyone in the town who participated, from the lumber...
See, everybody gets a share, because it's about the community. You know, if you don't have a baker that's doing well, you won't get fed, right? And so everybody contributes so that everybody does well in the small communities scattered all throughout the Norway. So basically everybody gets a cut of the money coming in.
Lumberjacks to the craftsmen. Over time, this resulted in a much more spread out and decentralized distribution of wealth and ownership in Norway, in addition to the spread out and decentralized population. And so, a large, centralized, and powerful class of capitalists never really developed in the country the same way that they did elsewhere in places like France and Britain, with their populations and economies both largely concentrated around their political capitals.
Yeah, that's the main problem with the world, isn't it? You got too many rich people, and they're filthy rich. Like, distribute the wealth, right? I mean, what did this guy say in the movie? Money is like manure. You got to spread it around, you know, to see it grow. Yeah.
Norway's geography, conversely, forced its people to trust each other and to cooperate on building the ships that were vital to their survival.
Yeah, trusting each other. I mean, if I leave my backpack over at the store, nobody's gonna grab it. If I leave my bike there, nobody's gonna grab it. Like, trust. I mean, we got a lot of foreigners in here, and they don't get the concept, alright? Takes a while for them to, you know, walk past a bike and not steal it. But basically, yeah, you're safe. Like, it's not a problem. Yeah, I saw one video, you know, it's common courtesy. If you see a mitten, right, laying on the street, you pick up the mitten and you hang it on a post right there, right? So people can come back and pick it up. I mean, that's just common sense, right? You don't need a fucking mitten now, do you? Right? But anywhere else in the world, you can pretty much bet that the mitten is gone by, you know, 2 minutes later. You know, and, yeah, more or less.
And so, early shipbuilding in Norway was largely cooperative in nature, and then that influenced the country's economy for centuries afterwards through to the present day, as Norwegian agriculture, forestry, maritime insurance, and fishing all became dominated by cooperatives, while the Norwegian banking sector throughout the 19th and 20th centuries became...
So it became dominant by cooperatives. So he means that everybody is cooperating, right, to get the industry rolling, right? That's what it means.
Effectively dominated by cooperative credit unions as well. Across the 19th century then, when Norway was widely believed to be a fairly poor region, Norway was actually already doing very well for itself in relative terms. By the 1850s...
Yeah, in relative terms, because the rest of Europe, I mean, back in those days, were poor as well, right? I mean, even though Norwegians were poor, there were a lot of places that were doing a lot worse.
Norway's GDP per capita was already higher than basically the entirety of Eastern Europe, exceeding that of Bulgaria, Romania, Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia. And by the 1880s, Norway's GDP per capita had eclipsed virtually all of Southern Europe too, including Portugal, Spain, and Greece, while by the turn of the 20th century in 1900, it had even surpassed that of Italy. And then by 1938, on the eve of the Second World War, decades before the discovery of oil in the country, Norway's GDP per capita had already exceeded those of Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, and by some...
So, Germany, France, and England. I mean, those are the powerhouses of Europe, right? And then you got Eastern Europe over here, which is just, I don't know too much about it, to be honest. Eastern Europe is just, well, they're a little bit over there. I don't know too much about it. Everybody knows where Spain is because, you know, it's the same size as France and the kingdom. So. And Italy, beautiful place, you know, Caesar and all that. And then you got the Greeks, you know, a little bit about Greek history and whatnot. But all these other ones, you never hear anything about them. It's just, they're over there somewhere. I don't know.
Estimates. It was already the wealthiest country on average in Europe. A huge part of the reason why Norway's economy accelerated so rapidly between 1900 and 1938 was the advent of modern advanced water turbines and hydroelectric dams that completely revolutionized Norway's geographic potential even further.
So 1930s.
I have never seen a production any better than this. Any.
Norway is
1930s, that's when we got hydro dams. Right? And because of that, we got rich right before the war. And Norway and Sweden were neutral during the Second World War, but we still got invaded by Germany, which is pretty fucking rough, you know, when you think about it. One thing I don't like is Americans on the Second World War. I just gotta mention it, alright? Like, they were the last ones to join, and every country in the world was fighting, but still they managed to, take the credit. Everybody else is just decimated, and they just swoop in and, yay, we saved you. Like, what the fuck, man?
a land that is almost completely covered by rivers that begin high up in the mountains and then thunder down their steep elevations toward the fjords and the coast in the west. These rivers are fed by predominantly westerly winds that bring them abundant levels of precipitation, and their steep drops and waterfalls provide a massive amount of kinetic energy just sitting there that can be captured by turbines to generate electricity.
Yeah, definitely a lot of rain. And the mountain range between Norway and Sweden just stops all the rain, pretty much. Well, I wouldn't say that, but yeah, the southern winds. I mean, you can definitely feel the shift when summer comes around. You have the hot winds, and you'll feel them. Right? Usually, yeah. I mean, then during the winter, you got the cold winds coming through Russia and all the plains there, the desert, tundra, that's what it's called, and really heavy winds there, and they're just picking up speed and whatnot. Yeah, I mean, I don't really know what to say. The Norwegian weather climate is pretty powerful. Let's put it that way. There's a lot of clashing. Yeah. But definitely a lot of water. Like, if you go hiking in Norway and you see a stream, go drink it. Why not? Like, I don't know if you can do that in the rest of the world. Probably some places, obviously. But yeah, I mean, just drink it. There's nothing there that's going to kill you as long as it's, flowing water. Safe to drink. That's what we've been taught as young. If it flows, it goes, right? So, yeah. But that's a lot of power, yeah.
Norway, therefore, has one of the highest hydroelectric power potentials of any country in the world. And beginning in 1905, they
highest power potential in the world based on hydro dams. That's a lot.
Started allowing outside foreign companies with higher levels of expertise come in and start building modern hydroelectric dams to unlock their potential. Dozens and then hundreds of hydropower stations were built all across the country, to the point where today there are 84 large hydropower stations with capacities greater than 10 megawatts, and 838 small hydropower stations with capacities between 1 and 10 megawatts.
So, 80 large ones and 800 small ones. That's a lot.
With hundreds of even smaller stations on top of that. All combined, these hydropower stations today are powerful enough to generate an overwhelming 95% of all of Norway's total electricity demand.
Like, this is all frozen most of the year, right? But still, you got hydropower up here. It's kind of fascinating. Like, maybe you wouldn't think about that. Like, it's all snow, but yeah, water's still flowing. 95% of our electrical need is met by the hydropower. That's pretty self-sustaining, I'd say.
While Norway is the 7th largest producer of hydropower anywhere in the world as of 2024, with a total generation rate that is more than half of the United States, but all for only 1/67th of the American.
Wait, half of the power need of the states? Was that what you said? I couldn't have said that.
To generate an overwhelming 95% of all of Norway's total electricity demand, while Norway is the 7th largest producer of hydropower anywhere in the world as of 2024, with a total generation rate that is more than half of the United States, but all
just hydropower generation. Okay.
For only 1/67th of the American population. The harnessing of Norway's hydro might in the early 20th century provided the country with its first major economic boom, as it enabled the country to rapidly industrialize and electrify itself. By 1920, Norway was consuming more electricity per capita than any other country in the world, and more than 2/3 of the population already had access to electricity, which was double the rate in the United States at the time. This huge amount of energy for such a small population then enabled the Norwegians to develop extremely energy-intensive factories that eventually began specializing in refined aluminum production under the Norsk Hydro Corporation, which is
Yeah, aluminum is pretty big in Norway. I don't know much about aluminum, but I had a friend working there, and you know. But yeah.
today one of the largest aluminum companies in the world. Norsk Hydro continues to source the vast majority of the energy they use to produce refined aluminum from Norway's hydropower, and the company is 34% publicly owned by the Norwegian state. It has enabled Norway to become by far the largest producer of aluminum in Europe, and the 8th largest producer in the world today, which
8th largest producer in the world today. Okay. Now the government, the state, it always takes its chunks out of these massive corporates in Norway, which is perfect. You know, we want the government to make a lot of money.
further makes the country the largest provider of aluminum to the European Union. But just as hydropower continued unlocking Norway's potential in the early 20th century, the industry came to become dominated by the large foreign companies that came to Norway to invest and build all of the dams out. And so, Norway sought to gradually wrest control over them to secure its own national control over its own resources.
Yeah, that's the thing, the government. Because, I mean, we have democracy and then we have a king, right? And the way things work, I mean, the elected leaders of the country, they come together and they form these laws and whatnot, right? But the king usually oversees the most important things. Like, he still plays a part, and he is very much for the people, right? It's for king and country. And, you know, having a king is national pride. I mean, there was a debate whether we should absolve the king or just get rid of him or whatever. That's just fucking nonsense. It's part of our culture. It's our pride. It's our... I mean, if you're Norwegian, have you ever are in doubt? I mean, just look to the king, right? Use him as an example. He's a great example. That's his job, right? I mean, the main way of thinking in Norway is that you think ahead. You plan for the future. I mean, that's how we've always had to done it for 12,000 years, right? You plan for winter, because when it hits, there's going to be no more food unless you go hunting or fishing, right? You got to stock up on potatoes. And that's the mentality that the king just reinforces just by being there. And him overseeing the government, taking part in that and being part of the debates that goes on in Norway, it just cements the importance of planning ahead and being responsible and taking care of the people, right? Because the state is for the people. The country is for the people. I mean, there wouldn't be a country without the people, right? So, yeah. It's just Norwegian thinking.
Norway's small and spread out population lacked large amounts of capital and technical expertise, however. They needed the large foreign investors to help them build out their hydroelectric and factory potential. And so, a straight-up quick nationalization of the foreign investors' assets would have sent all of that foreign investment and expertise they needed fleeing in the future. To avoid that outcome, but to still secure their own control over their own resources, Norway decided on taking a pragmatic and long approach to the hydro industry that would directly influence their approach to the oil and gas industry decades later. Norway established rules that foreign companies who came to invest in...
So that's the old king, by the way. Yep. That's him. I've seen some people watch this video and they have no idea who this guy is. So yeah, that's the former king.
Norwegian Hydro would have to follow. That included clauses that hydroelectric power stations and mines they built and funded would have to be turned over to the Norwegian government without compensation after a period of 60 to 80 years of operation.
So after 70 years of operating, they have to be turned over to the government and to the state and to the country, right? And that's the kind of thinking that has made Norway great. Because no matter what you do in Norway, no matter what kind of a business you set up, Norway is always going to take its cut because it's Norwegian resources, right? The resources are, it's the country, and the country should definitely get a bigger cut, right? And the king plays a large part in that, because the king is basically the owner of the country, right? I mean, if you look at it that way, and the king represents the people, so if you look at it that way, you might understand a bit better.
This way, the larger foreign companies would continue to invest in the country since they would see a long enough return on their investment. But the Norwegian state knew that in the long run, they would be the ones to secure the keys to their crown jewels, and
Yeah, in the long run, it'll be ours, but, you know, we need the investment. And, you know, in order for people to invest in something, they need to see a profit. So, you know, take a little bit of loss, but we get things going, right? So that's a good way of doing it.
as a result, more than 90% of Norway's hydro capacity is publicly owned by the state today.
Publicly owned by the state. 90%. That's what he said, right? So, yeah. King. I mean, the king is just responsible, right? Making sure that the country is running smoothly. That's the king's chore. You know, it all falls on him in the end. So, yeah. Yeah. So his son is Olav, and then his son is Harald. I don't know, I've been out of the game.
And this is all why Norway was already a wealthy, heavily industrialized, democratic, and low-corruption state by the time that interest in the country's potential offshore oil and gas fields came around in the late 1950s.
Yeah, 1950s, that's when oil started popping up. And then they're going to do the same thing with the as they did with the hydro, right? They're going to get the investors in, but in long term, they're going to take control over it, right? It's the Norwegian way.
But at the time back then, there were very few people who actually believed that there was any oil or gas to be found around the country, particularly on the shallow and submerged part of the European continental shelf stretching beneath the North Sea, a large part of which had, geologically speaking, only been recently submerged a few thousand years ago at the end of the previous ice age. In a letter written by the Geological Survey of Norway in 1958 that has since aged fairly poorly, they concluded that the possibility of any oil or gas resources being discovered on the Norwegian part of this continental shelf should be discounted entirely. But then, very suddenly in 1959, just the year after that letter was written, a very major natural gas discovery was made nearby that sparked significant further interest: the Groningen gas field in the northern Netherlands. It turned out that the Groningen field to date is the 11th largest single natural gas field ever discovered in the world, and the largest one ever discovered within the European continent.
So, yeah. A lot of gas right in the Netherlands, which probably explains why Europe is so dependent on gas, and with it, oil too, right? Because there's a lot of energy to be harnessed from it and whatnot, so, yeah.
Became central to the early emergence of the Netherlands as a major gas-producing country, and it became a cornerstone of the domestic European gas market. And so, naturally, its discovery back in 1959 sparked renewed interest and curiosity that just perhaps there were further gas and potentially even oil discoveries still to be made further beyond beneath the as-yet unexplored North Sea as well. 3 years later, in 1962, the American petroleum major Phillips became the first to submit an application to the Norwegian government to begin exploring for oil and gas resources within their section of the North Sea. The only problem was, at the time, nobody really knew where Norway's section of the North Sea actually was.
That's kind of interesting, right? it's all up for grabs because nobody knows where the land line is, or the ocean line or whatever. So nobody knows.
Because the maritime boundaries within the North Sea hadn't been firmly or legally settled yet between all of the nations that surrounded it.
So this was in the 1960s. Norway got its independence in the 1886, was it? That's when they broke off from Sweden. So that's probably why the borders haven't been set up, because nobody's been bothering, with Norway, Sweden, and Denmark for the last couple hundred years, really, Like, why would they? They're just over there somewhere, and they're not relevant, really, except for the lumber, of course.
But luckily for Norway in 1965, eager to get exploring and drilling themselves, the government of the UK hastily agreed to simply divide the continental shelf beneath the North Sea based on the principle of the median line distance, the geographic line running down the center of the North Sea between the UK's land territory and Norway's land territory. Decades later.
So half and half, right? You just split everything equally, right? I'm not sure how this works, but you can see it looks like an even split, right? Like halfway between the land masses there goes a line, right? Halfway between right there, because so they just split everything equally, and like it's the most it's the best way of doing it, right? I mean, you could try grabbing more, but then you need these countries to agree to everything that you set up and whatnot. So, why would the UK push anything other than that? And, where's Belgium? Isn't Belgium? Is it that now? Okay. All right. So Sweden gets, halfway between Denmark and Sweden, here goes the line, and halfway between Norway and this, This is probably contested a bit, who gets the islands and whatnot.
Later, this hasty calculation would go on to massively benefit the Norwegians, because it took into account all of the thousands of Norway's islands just off of their western coast in determining where the median line ran, including the island of Utsira, 16 kilometers west from the mainland Norwegian coast, which shifted the median line boundary westwards just ever so much by a few extra kilometers that when the massive Stratfjord oil field was discovered later in the 1970s, right along the median line, only 15% of it would exist within the previously agreed upon UK maritime zone. While
So that little island, 16 kilometers off the coast, just, yeah, that was pretty cool, huh? So, if it hadn't been for that little island, ooh, it was pretty fun.
85% of it would be within the Norwegian zone, giving literally billions of dollars in extra oil revenue to the Norwegians over the British as a result. Almost immediately after agreeing with the British.
So there's his son, the king's son. There's the king in the back there, right? And there's his son, Olaf the Fifth. Yeah. And this is the present king, I think. Yeah. It's a bit older now, you might say. So, king. And, yeah, his son is gonna take over after him, so. That's the line so far. And this guy was originally from Denmark, I think. A Danish lord or something like that. He got control over Norway when Norway split from Denmark. So yeah, a bit of history for you there.
British on the median line principle in 1965, the Norwegian government began granting exploration licenses to larger and more experienced foreign companies to search through their waters that included Phillips. And the first oil was struck only a couple years later in 1967, at a field they called Balder. But it wasn't considered economically viable at the time. It wouldn't be until the 1990s, 3 decades later, that Balder would finally begin operation. And then
3 decades. I mean, that's the other thing about Norway. We don't really rush into things. I mean, we got all the time in the world. Shit ain't moving nowhere. Like, if you don't know how to do it, just figure it out. Take your time. Do it right. Right? And, yeah, that's another Norwegian mentality. Because there's no real rush with anything. You know? But, yeah. It's got its good ups and downs, right?
finally, just before Christmas Day in 1969, Phillips delivered the Norwegian government and people perhaps the greatest Christmas present in their nation's entire millennia-long history. The news that they had discovered the Ekofisk field, which turned out to be one of the largest offshore oil fields that has ever been discovered before or since anywhere in the world. Production out of Ekofisk began only a couple years later in 1971, and then a series of further major oil and gas discoveries were made all across the Norwegian continental shelf.
So that's the biggest field, right? It's not the it's not like the world's, I don't know how to explain this. It's a great big field, but it doesn't account for the world's supply, right? Like if you look at the States, there might be a lot of small supplies, but they accumulate into something bigger, right? But this is the largest, so nothing really to brag about, but it's a lot of money, of course. So, yeah.
Over the years that followed, at fields like Stratfjord, Oseberg, Gullfax, and Troll.
Yeah, and that's right off the fjord right here, the largest fjord in Norway, right out there. And all that is getting shipped down through Stavanger and whatnot, more or less down here, right, on its way to Europe, basically. So, yeah, you got Bergen somewhere in here, and then you got Stavanger down here, something.
The latter of which generated a media sensation in 1996, when the Norwegians transported the Troll A offshore oil platform to the field from the Norwegian mainland. To date, this operation remains both the heaviest and the tallest structure that has ever been moved by human beings from one part of the Earth's surface to another. It was also during this time that the Norwegians quickly began applying the previous lessons they had learned with the country's hydro industry to the rapidly emerging oil and gas industry as well. The country founded a state-owned oil and gas company that they initially called Statoil almost immediately after the first production of oil began. And just like the pragmatic and long-term approach that the Norwegians took with the country's
That's pronounced Statoil, by the way. Yeah. But yeah, they're gonna take control of it later on, 60 years down the line or whatever kind of agreement they make. But yeah, shipbuilding and construction offshore, I mean, it's all very Viking, right? I mean, so far it's all been done at sea. It's just the Norwegian way. It's the coastline. It's where we settle, it's where we work, it's how we do stuff. You can see that in the new military boats as well. They're pretty cool. So.
Hydro industry in the early 20th century, they began establishing rules that the larger and more experienced foreign oil and gas companies would have to follow in order to invest in Norway's resources that would ensure Norway's eventual control over them. The Norwegian state-owned Statoil was to always have more than a 50% ownership stake in every production license that the government granted, which was designed to provide the larger and more experienced foreign oil and gas companies an incentive to still come and invest in the country, while also providing Statoil with valuable real-world experience through learning from the joint ventures. And Norway's previous high levels of expertise in the shipbuilding industry proved invaluable to Norway's quick mastery of offshore and subsea oil and gas infrastructure projects too. One of the
Yeah. Norwegian shipping industry, it's pretty knowledgeable, let's put it that way. Like growing up in Norway, I have my own boat. Like when I was 10, I got my own boat. The neighboring kid, he got his first boat. He actually bought his boat when he was, well, probably around 10. He's about 5 years older than me, so yeah. So every day, pretty much, we would go out just fishing. Yeah. We'd just go out and fish. We'd do, I don't know, a couple of hours of fishing. Just like every day. That was the thing to do, you know. Catch all kinds of fish. That's just my childhood, right there. Just fishing. It's in my blood. And we'd have all kinds of fun, because sometimes there'd be big waves, sometimes there'd be small waves. We'd ride that surf. Oh yeah. The engines are just revving away. And you know, in the summertime you get the mackerel in here, and we would fill the fucking boat. No joke. But the thing I wanted to say is, the boat that he got is a very safe boat. It's an Askeladden, a 14-footer. Like, if you beached that motherfucker, if you punctured a hole in it, it would pretty much still float. Yeah. And, well, around here, it's not open seas because of all the fjords. So, if the engine stalled, we would drift to some kind of shore. It's not open seas straight to America. We've got a little bit of a safeguard, you know. Of course, we got oars, but 2 kids, you know, 5 and 10, you know, it's not the most safe thing, but they just let us out there, because, fuck it. Like, that's Norway.
The leading underwater oil and gas infrastructure companies in the world today is currently Subsea 7, with billions of dollars in annual revenue, and they were founded as a joint venture in 2002 by an American company and a Norwegian shipbuilding company known as DNSD, that had been itself founded a century and a half previously back in 1854. Fairly recently in 2018, Statoil's name was changed to what it's currently known by, Equinor. And today, thanks to Norway's foresight in guiding the company and helping it gain foreign expertise over the decades, Equinor is itself a global energy major and is ranked as the 10th largest oil and gas company in the world, with a current market cap of roughly $85 billion.
Here's the thing. If you're gonna do anything, company-wise, in Norway, the government makes sure that you do it safely. And, you know, to prevent natural oil spills, for example, or safety to people and whatnot during construction and operating and whatnot. Okay? Because the government makes sure that you do everything in a very strict way, like you're supposed to do, to be as safe as possible. It looks after you. And it implements all these safeguards on companies in Norway. And that's a big part of why Norway is such a good place. Like, I know down in Spain, oh my god. I heard this one story. They were producing an oil rig in Spain, and they shipped it up to Norway. And when it got to Norway, all the bolts were rusted. They had to replace every fucking bolt on the rig because they didn't know that salt doesn't work well with steel or iron. Like, what the fuck? Like, what kind of a monkey made that rig? Right? So yeah, if something is built in Norway, it's built to last. That's you know, the Scandinavian mentality, I guess. You know, look at IKEA. I don't know. Does that count?
which puts it on a similar footing to the current market cap of BP at about 98.3 billion. Equinor now produces approximately 70% of all the oil and gas on the Norwegian continental shelf today, and it remains 67% majority owned by the Norwegian government, with the remaining 33% of its shares being publicly traded on global stock exchanges, like the New York Stock
67% Norwegian state owned. See? They haven't invested interest in it. Because it's the resources in Norway. And they're being responsible about it. They're not shipping it somewhere else just to sell it off. Which is not exactly true. You know, because most of the oil is getting shipped offshore to other countries. They're the one using it. Norway, we're reliant on hydroelectrics. Electricity. We don't use fossil fuels. You know, we all got cars, but we're trying to be electric about it. So it's an interesting thing, isn't it? But yeah. I mean, I trust the government. I'm from Norway. I trust the government because I know they do a great job. That's just how it is. They're looking out for our interest, the interest of the nation, not self-interest. There's one thing. Norwegian salary. Like a doctor in the U.S. will make $2 million. A doctor in Norway will make $1 million. Right? And that extra million goes into the government and is distributed amongst poorer people. Like, I don't know, people working in grocery stores, right? They would maybe in the U.S. make 100,000, and over here they would make like 200,000. I don't know exact the salary, but it's all, you know, condensed so that we have less poor people and less richer people, and everybody is right there in the middle pretty much, because we're all working together and the government takes care of that. This is very nice.
Exchange on the NASDAQ. And as it turned out, there actually was a lot of oil and gas on the Norwegian continental shelf. So much so that Norway now has the largest reserves of oil in Europe outside of Russia, and is ranked 20th in the world, with similar volumes as former OPEC countries Angola and Ecuador, and with more than 3 times as many reserves as the next place in Europe just across the North Sea, the UK. And in terms of natural gas, Norway again is ranked as having the largest reserves in Europe outside of Russia, and the 21st largest in the world, with volumes that are similar to the likes of Kuwait and Azerbaijan. And with its extremely close proximity to the European Union's market, Norway had a ready-to-go export market all lined up for itself as well. With hardly any oil and gas resources of their own beyond the Groningen gas field in the Netherlands, the EU has practically always had to import the vast majority of the oil and gas they consume from abroad. Oil.
Yeah. Right. This is the tycoon, I think. The oil tycoon. And this is the prime minister, former prime minister. He's now the head honcho in the EU, some, I don't know his work. But yeah, he's moved up, I guess. I guess he's getting a bigger salary. But yeah, all the gas made in Norway. Of course, Russia is bigger. I mean, it's fucking massive, in it. Yeah, it's all tundra, but yeah, it's fucking massive. But other than that, Norway is doing pretty fucking well. You know, it's huge in resources. So,
Oil was a far easier problem for the EU to solve, though, because oil can effectively be imported from anywhere else in the world. The bloc was less handicapped by geography here because, in its crude form, oil is a liquid that can be easily loaded up into barrels or containers and shipped across the oceans on container ships from origin to destination.
If you want to do some shipping, though, you gotta come to Norway, because we know ships, right? That.
Meaning that the EU could easily import oil from as far away as the Americas and Nigeria with little worries. But natural gas was a completely different problem for the Europeans to solve. Gas is far more difficult and expensive to export and move around the world than oil because, well, it's a gas.
Yeah, you need gas pipes, and we put them under the sea. Thing of it is, on the news lately, I heard this fucking story. There was a ship that was riding along the coastline with its anchor out, and it was tearing through electrical cables and gas lines and whatnot. Or it could have done that. I'm not sure. I didn't pay too close attention. But that, I mean, if Russia were to go to war with Norway or something like that, all they need is a sub with an anchor, and they will just wreak havoc on everything. That's not good. You know? That's, it's a fairly weak point. Fairly big weak point, but yeah. But if that happened, a lot of the gas supply in Europe would be cut off. That's pretty major. Makes them an easier target. You know. So that's not cool. Oh, yeah. Don't have to rely on oil. And there was an argument about people getting pissed off at Germany for shutting down their nuclear reactor and whatnot. Like, what the fuck? They'll do whatever they want to do. It's their country. Like, buzz off.
While it's in its gaseous state, it takes up a huge amount of volume and is completely economically impractical to load up onto container vessels and ship somewhere else. Thus, before the rise of liquefied natural gas production, gas markets were highly geographically regional in nature.
Liquefied gas production. Now, I've seen gas tankers. Right? So is that liquefied? They can transport gas if it's liquefied, if they freeze it. And that's what those tankers do. And that makes it viable. Makes it, yeah. So I guess that's, you know, one way of doing it if somebody tears up the lines. But still, it's an easy target, right? Major gas ship. Yeah. You don't want to release all that gas, though. Not thinking about nature and whatnot. You know, pollution. You don't want to be doing that, mate. I mean, rather you just send a pirate ship, stop the ship, okay? Fine. But don't blow it up.
For Europe, this meant building out a series of pipelines to transport natural gas from relatively nearby sources to consumers.
That's a lot of gas pipes, isn't it? Yeah, it just shows how dependent Europe is on gas. Eventually that'll run out.
The largest of which, during the 20th and early 21st centuries, were constructed from the relatively nearby gas sources in the Netherlands.
That's pretty big, isn't it? Yeah, Russia's got it. They fucked that up, though, didn't they? Went to war and whatnot. Jeez.
Netherlands, Algeria, the Soviet and later Russian Siberian fields from Azerbaijan after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and of course from Norway and the Norwegian continental shelf. This historically made the EU mostly dependent upon natural gas imports from three of its closest and largest neighbors: Russia, Norway, and Algeria. By 2021, Norway had constructed a total of 11 undersea gas pipelines connecting their gas resources directly to European consumers. And then in 2010, Norwegian gas production exceeded the country's oil production for the very first time, as the demand in the EU and the UK continued growing for more. And by the 2010s, Norway had already emerged as the second largest exporter of natural gas to the EU, only behind the Russians. By 2021, the year immediately before Russia launched its full-scale invasion into Ukraine, Russia was supplying about 40% of the EU's total gas imports, while Norway...
Right, 40% from Russia into Europe. That's a lot of money, and they risked it all on trying to take Ukraine. Like, what the hell is Putin thinking? And who the hell is advising him? Like, how dumb do you get? How fucking dumb can you be? And he's paying for it now. Jeez.
Norway was supplying about another 25% of them, while Russia was further supplying the EU with about 25% of their oil imports, up against Norway's share of 9.4% of their oil imports. And by this point, with...
So Russia had 25%, Norway had 9% on the oil. Okay. So 75%, 65% is from elsewhere on the globe.
billions of dollars a year gushing into the Norwegian economy, Norway had already effectively become a petrostate, the only one in Europe other than Russia. In 2021, oil and gas made up roughly 21% of the entire Norwegian GDP and made up a whopping 51% of all of Norway's exports by value. But Norway never actually evolved into the usual petrostate stereotypes of corruption and authoritarianism, for several notable reasons that set it notably apart from the others. While there is no universally agreed upon definition of what actually constitutes a petrostate, the most general definitions revolve around countries whose economies are very heavily dependent upon the extractions and exporting of oil and gas to the point where without those industries, their economies could face collapse.
Yeah. Nations dependent on a resource that will eventually fade out. I mean, that's just stupid. Like, if you have a cake and you figure I'm gonna live off of this for a month, you're not gonna make it. Like, what the fuck? Grow some potatoes or something, you know? Like, learn how to fish or it's just amazing how the rest of the world is just fucking it up. Like, how do you do that? Like, wake the fuck up. Elect somebody in office with a little bit of, dignity, integrity, common sense, like, Jesus Christ.
25 countries around the world spanning South America, Africa, the Middle East, Europe, and Asia usually come to mind as the world's most classic examples of petrostates. And out of all 25 of them...
So all these red ones, Norway's in there too. Petrostates. I mean, are these just the ones with oil in them?
Every single one are considered by the Economist Democracy Index to be either authoritarian regimes or hybrid regimes, except for only two of them, Indonesia and Norway. But Norway stands out above all of the rest, ahead of even Indonesia, because the same index for...
So only Indonesia and Norway are using their oil for the people, and the rest are just gobbling up whatever they can for themselves, individually, making a small amount of billionaires out of it. Like, that is just... wow. Just shows you how fucked up the world is.
From The Economist literally ranks Norway.
So this is the Norwegian government house, right? And it's right across from the castle, which would be behind the camera. It's in Oslo. So this is where the parliament meets, I guess. Parliament. I don't know, I don't know the exact number, between 150 and 200 representatives from all over the world that gather here and vote on things and stuff. Something like that. Write in the comments down below, right? Correct me, because I'm going to be wrong about certain things when it comes to numbers and shit like that. Yeah.
as the single most democratic, free, and egalitarian society on the face of the earth, which puts its status as a petrostate into an extremely stark contrast with the likes of Saudi Arabia, Iran, Russia, and Venezuela, which are all among the most heavily authoritarian and corrupt states in the world. And a big part of the reason why an abundance of oil and gas resources didn't turn Norway into a heavily authoritarian and corrupt state like most of the other petrostates is because of the country's geography, history, and forward-looking policies that their government.
Jens Stoltenberg, the former Prime Minister of Norway. Yeah. He's big in NATO. Is that it? Or is it the European Union? I'm not really paying attention to shit. I don't even have a TV, okay? I'm just making a video on this and my... You know, what is it like to live in Norway? It's very easygoing. Like, you don't have to pay for pretty much anything. Like, healthcare is free. School is free. If you want to get a job, go get a job. If you can't get a job, the government will help you out until you do. Ta-da! Like, yeah. If you're sick, you'll get benefits and you'll be fine. I mean, being Norwegian is so great. And if you like hiking, well, you can pretty much go anywhere, live anywhere, travel anywhere in Norway and just take it in. Because you'll be in nature and you'll be all alone. That's what you want, right? Just experience nature, feel the breeze on your face and smell the clean air, drink the water straight out of the stream. Catch a fish, why not? There's plenty of it. You know, if you want to make a little campfire, you can most of the time. There are a couple of bans, but, you know, just be safe about it. Have some common sense. You know, like any Norwegian will just go on a hike and just make a little fire. It's not a problem. Right? But if there's a drought or anything like that, you don't do it. Most Norwegians, you know, they know not to make a fire when it's very dry. And if they do, they'll make it in, you know, right next to the ocean. Like, if you're gonna make a fire, it's common sense to have water nearby. Like, duh. If you need a fire to cook some food, go right ahead. You need to cook fish, go right ahead. Nobody's gonna stop you. Just, they'll come over and check that you're being safe about it. If you know what you're doing, you know what you're doing. No worries.
Enacted from early on. When Norway discovered oil, the country.
And if you don't know what you're doing, don't do it. Common sense right there.
Country already had a long culture of communal ownership of natural resources going back centuries to the lumber and hydro industries. The country was already wealthy, industrialized, highly developed, and had a stable, functioning democracy where wealth and power were each already highly decentralized.
Yeah, decentralized power and wealth and whatnot. It's all distributed. It's not centralized. You don't have one group controlling everything. Everybody gets an equal say. Democracy and voting on everything. Like, we turned down the EU with a public vote twice, right? Lots of reasons for that, but one of the side effects is their booze is pretty expensive. Like, who gives a shit? Like, what the fuck? People keep complaining about it. Like, do you have to get drunk every time you walk out the door? No, you don't. This is not Ireland. Like, Denmark has a big beer culture. But yeah, I mean, drinking in Norway, you can do it, but save it for the weekends. And do you have to do it every weekend? I mean, don't you want a little bit of family time and whatnot? You know, so I don't see the big whoop about alcohol being pricey. It's one of the things in Norway that's considered a luxury, so you pay more for it, like oil. It's a luxury. You should be dependent on electricity. Electricity is fairly high priced right now, so that's but Right where I live, it's cheap as all hell. Hasn't changed one bit. I'm just writing.
Democratic institutions and communal ownership of resources were already strongly ingrained within the fabric of Norwegian society as a result, which is an incredibly stark contrast to just about every single other country that discovered enormous oil and gas wealth. Saudi Arabia discovered its oil wealth when it was ruled by a warlord who had established an absolute monarchy and had already centralized power fully around himself. And so the oil wealth only further cemented the monarchy's power. Oil was similarly discovered in Iran while the country was ruled by an autocratic monarchy, and the keys to the oil wealth were inherited by the still autocratic Islamic Revolution after 1979. Oil was discovered within Russia during the Tsarist period, and the keys to the oil wealth were inherited by the still autocratic Soviets, and then further inherited by the modern Putinist regime. Oil was...
See? That's where Russia is going wrong. That one person in power, controlling the entire nation, has all the money and all the power and whatnot. Like, they're not being responsible about it. I mean, for fuck's sakes, Putin went to war. I don't know how many wars he's been in, but, you know. Like, how is that responsible? How are you taking care of your people? Like, what is the thinking about there? Like, oh, Russia is great, we're the great big dog. I don't know. Like, dumb. Fucking insane. Like, invest in the country. Right? That's where the money should go.
Was discovered in Venezuela during the autocratic military dictatorship of Juan Vicente Gomez, while the oil industries in Syria, Iraq, the United Arab Emirates, and all across Africa were basically handed over directly from autocratic European colonial administrations to autocratic dictatorships that immediately or very quickly took over in their place. Of all the countries to have ever discovered enormous oil and gas wealth, only a handful have ever done so while already being wealthy, politically independent, and with stable traditions of democracy and low levels of inequality. And the only one with a very small population to have ever done so has been Norway. Norway was thus better prepared to handle the sudden influx of oil and gas wealth than most others have been, but it still initially caused the Norwegian economy to become rapidly undiversified and dependent on oil and gas anyway. Throughout the 1970s and early 80s, when the price of oil was high, the oil-dependent Norwegian economy was booming, but then in 1986, the price of oil suddenly collapsed, and with it, Norway's heavily oil-dependent economy suffered its first oil-induced recession.
Woo! Recession! Whee! Right? Teach those motherfuckers a lesson, not to be dependent on the oil and the wealth of it. So yeah, that's why you have places like Stavanger, and you'll see that walking around. There's a lot of richer people down there than I think anywhere else, because that's where all the oil came in. So the people living at that time in Stavanger, they really got their wealth on, more so than everybody else. And then the collapse, right? So, I mean, I don't know my history all that well, but that makes sense to me, right? That's how, yeah. All right.
In the past 6 decades of history, going back to 1960, the Norwegian economy has only ever shrunk on 3 occasions. In 2020, during the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, in 2009, during the depths of the Great Financial Crisis, and in 1988, back during the depths of this oil recession. But the Norwegian government learned a valuable lesson from this recession in the 1980s. It needed to diversify itself away from the unpredictable ebbs and flows in the oil market. And so, just a couple years later in 1990, the Norwegian...
So that's the old Prime Minister. We've had several. We get a new one every 4 years or so. But this one, she was great. I mean, she was spot on. She was like the older generation, you know, wise, smart, responsible. Yeah, the old guard, man, they did it right. I don't know about today's politics. I mean, there's...
state, with its long history of communal ownership of resources and democratic institutions, had the foresight and the capability to establish the Pension Fund Global, otherwise known as the...
I wonder if this is the old Prime Minister before her. I'm not sure, because I was pretty young at the time. Maybe. But I know she was prime minister. So, yeah. Gro Harlem Brundtland. Yeah.
So-called oil fund. The fund was established as a communal sovereign wealth fund owned by the Norwegian state and people, into which the surplus revenues from the state-owned oil company Equinor and taxes on the oil and gas industry would be invested into for the benefit of Norway's future generations, and to diversify the government and economy away from oil and gas. Strict rules and guidelines were established around the fund's operations. It would invest heavily into global stock markets and real estate in order to diversify away from the Norwegian economy. And
See, that is just so smart. You invest on a global scale and not just in, you spread it around. You spread your investments around, because if one country tanks, you'll still have all the countries to keep you afloat. I mean, that's just common sense, but how many people actually do that? I mean, you've seen these apps, right? The commercials for the apps and whatnot. Like, we have robot investors, and then there's bitcoins and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So, there's a lot of money to be made that way, but Norway caught on fairly quick. Been leading the way for a while when it comes to money and money handling, I would say anyway. Like, there's a lot of things that we're doing right, and just being smart about it, saving up for winter.
very strict rules were set into place that no more than 3% of the fund's assets could be withdrawn in any given year.
See, that's very important. 3% they're drawn every year. So basically, that's like radiation. I mean, you withdraw 3%, right? But then next year, you draw 3% out of that. So if you draw it 100 times, you won't get 300%. You'll just get 3% of whatever's there. And that's fucking, that's the kind of law that just cementifies that there will always be money there. And that's just one of the things that's just so brilliant. I mean, I love that. Like, if you withdrew 3% over the next 200 years, there'd still be money there. Like, it's freaking brilliant.
Not only enabled the fund to continue growing and compounding with time, but also disallowed the abuse of the fund's assets by Norwegian politicians, who would otherwise be tempted into promising to lavishly spend the oil wealth today at the expense of tomorrow in order to get themselves elected. A hallmark of the more autocratic petrostates where unpopular...
Like, you see in America, they have these election runs and whatnot. You don't have that in Norway. Like, people know what the parties stand for, and we have a lot more than two. I don't know how many parties there are, but there's a lot. And people know who they want in power, and that's who they vote for. And yeah. There is one thing, though, that's flawed with democracy, I will say, and that's the 50% barrier. I think that's fucked up. Like, if you're gonna change any laws or make any changes to the system that's working in place and whatnot, if it's 50-50, it's pretty much a toss-up. You don't know where to go. I would say don't change it. If you get 75%, though, saying that this needs to change or this is fine, well, then you're golden. Then you know for sure. Like 50-50, like voting on EU 50-50, like if you get 51%, like that's a fucking toss up. That's a coin toss. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Alright? Take that democracy 50% and raise it to 75. It's just a smarter thing to do. Like, implementing change, you need 75%. Otherwise, just keep it, man. I don't know, 75, 66, whatever.
regimes or dictators spend the oil wealth lavishly on their people as a sort of bargain for them to put up with their authoritarianism. And as the Norwegian oil and gas industry continued growing and more wealth was deposited into the oil fund, and as the global economy continued growing alongside it, and as withdrawals were capped at no more than 3% per year, the Norwegian oil fund steadily evolved from nothing in 1990 into the absolute behemoth that it is today. Currently, the fund is by far the largest sovereign wealth fund in the entire world. Its current net assets exceed more than $1.5 trillion US dollars.
$1.5 trillion US dollars. With the Russian war going on, in 5 years' time, if things go the way they're going right now, that's gonna be double. Yeah, because Norway is making like 200 billion a year now, versus its usual 70 billion or something exporting oil. So yeah, if Russia keeps it up for the next 5 years, we're gonna be swimming in money.
And the fund owns an estimated 1.5% of all the shares of all the more than 9,000 publicly traded companies in the world. And
That's a lot of shares in a lot of companies of the entire world. Holy fuck.
the global stock market's single largest investor today, making the fund the world's biggest stock market whale. This is despite the fact that the Norwegian economy itself only represents about 0.5% of the entire global economy, and despite the fact that the Norwegian population only represents about 0.07% of the worldwide human population, and yet they own 1.5% of the global stock market. The oil fund is currently—
That's some weird fucking numbers, I tell you that. Makes me think of China somehow. Because there's 1.2 billion people in China, and there's 1.2 billion people in India. That's a lot of people. That is a lot of people. I was thinking about this. If China wanted to fuck with Russia, I mean, basically they could just start walking north. I mean, if they started walking north, yeah, nothing could stand in their way. Besides a nuke, you know. But once they cross that border, you'll be nuking yourself. Like, yeah. So yeah, it's kind of funny to think about. Another thing, I've heard that India is the country that pollutes the most in the world. I don't know how that's figured out, but well, they're not exactly rich and whatnot. There's, you know, when you look at India, you don't think, ooh, these are some rich people. They have fancy lives and whatnot. Like China too, like in the cities, they live in tiny apartments. Like they don't have much space, right? But they're all alive. They're all doing good. I mean, it's sustainable, which is just amazing. Like so many people. How do they do it? And then you look at Norway, it's 5 million people. Like, what the fuck? You can count. There are probably more flies in Norway than there are people. I mean, it's funny. But China, yeah. I mean, they got lots of land, and they got lots of people. And they're doing all right. I mean, you look at some of the big cities in China, they're very nice. And, yeah, there's definitely something to be learned there. And, well, to be quite frank, the Norwegians need to fuck more. Which is kind of weird, because, you know, from ancient time, Vikings and whatnot, Vikings would just fuck anybody, you know. And the great gatherings and whatnot. Hey, we're getting drunk on mushrooms and whatnot. Woo, let's find somebody.
Currently so massive relative to Norway's small population that it's worth approximately $275,000 per Norwegian citizen, if they decided to ever cash it all out. And it's already reached a point where the fund's conservatively capped 3% withdrawal rate per year can safely provide for about 20% of the entire Norwegian government's annual budget in perpetuity.
20% of the budget. So that's 3%. Withdrawing 3% from the fund would... I'm not sure what he said here. I'm gonna...
$175,000 per Norwegian citizen, if they decided to ever cash it all out. And it's already reached a point where the fund's conservatively capped 3% withdrawal rate per year can safely provide for about 20% of the entire...
Yeah, if you withdraw the 3% from the fund every year, that accumulates to 20% of all the spendings of Norway. Like, we're living off the interests here, boys and girls. It's pretty fucking nice. Yeah. And that shit is gonna double if Russia keeps it up for 5 more years. That's just... So that would be 40%. Woo.
Norwegian government's annual budget
But when that's not the end of it, wait till you see what's down here.
in perpetuity, giving Norway the ability to rely less on the unpredictable fluctuations of oil and gas price revenue to continue funding their government operations and shielding the country from future oil price collapses. Now, back to Norway's oil and gas industry. The country controls the 20th largest proven reserves of oil and the 21st largest proven reserves of natural gas, which have granted Norway the ability to become the world's 13th largest oil producer and the 9th largest gas producer, representing about 2% of worldwide oil demand and 3% of worldwide gas demand. But Norway's fairly modest shares of worldwide oil and gas reserves and production are each absolutely dwarfed by Norway's massively outsized shares of worldwide oil and gas exports. Despite only being the 13th largest oil producer and only having the 20th largest reserves, Norway is currently the world's 8th largest oil exporter and is fast approaching the exports of Kuwait in 7th place, despite Kuwait having 12.5 times more oil reserves than Norway and 50% higher oil production. And it's even more lopsided when it comes to natural gas, where, despite only being the 9th largest producer and only having the 21st largest reserves, Norway is the 4th largest global exporter anyway, only just barely behind the big 3 of the global gas market.
Yeah, okay. A lot of numbers flying around there. But basically, when you got 5 million people, you know, with cars, you don't spend all that much oil. You export it. And you put the money in the bank. Yeah. But the other countries, despite having bigger oil reserves, they spend a lot more oil. Like, look at the States. They got cheap oil over there, right? Cheap gas, whatnot. Right? They're spending a lot of it. They're not exporting it. Major consumers of oil. Yeah.
Market. The United States, Russia, and Qatar, the latter of which the Norwegians are rapidly approaching a takeover of to become one of the new top 3 in the global gas industry. Now, Norway has been able to achieve this massively outsized presence in its share of global oil and gas exports due to several different factors. The first of which is, of course, its close proximity to the energy-hungry European Union, and its ability to construct subsea pipelines directly from source to consumer. The next factor is Norway's own small population that naturally has a lower energy demand than countries with similar reserves but much larger populations, like Angola, Ecuador, and Azerbaijan. While the third
Thing of it is, these pipelines, they're such a crucial thing. Like, if you couldn't lay those pipelines, you'd be fucked. You'd have to transport them by ship. Right? Everything would be slower, everything would just be more work and whatnot. But the pipelines, they're crucial. So yeah, that's don't anchor us, please. But yeah, how they did that, I mean, the oceans, right? That's what we use. That's what we do. Vikings and whatnot. It's what we've been doing since day one. So yeah, we probably have some good technology when it comes to oceanography and whatnot. And, I mean, how do you do that? Like these must be 1,000 feet tall, deep, and 2,000 deep, maybe some places. Like, how do you plan that out? How do you do it? That is amazing. It's underwater. Like, what? Yeah, that is a feat, man. That is really an achievement.
Third and arguably biggest factor is a result of Norway's own geography and strategically chosen policies. Norway produces enough renewable hydropower through all of its rivers and dams to power 95% of the country's electricity demand. And in addition to having the largest hydro potential in Europe, the country also has one of the largest wind potentials as well. The coasts around Norway and the mountains that run along the country's spine are among the windiest locations to be found on a continent that is generally not a very windy place.
Yeah, lots of wind too. We had a vote right here. We voted not to erect windmills. Why? Because Norwegians are just built different. Turns out there's a lot of eagles here. And windmills are a danger to eagles. So we voted not to do it. Even though it would have boosted our economy, we elected not to do it. It's just, we don't need it. It's gonna, it's gonna make an impact that's negative on our environment. So we elected not to do it. Fuck the money. This Norwegian mentality. Like, nah. We don't want to destroy the nice nature that we got with windmills and whatnot. I mean, if you look at Denmark, however, they got a large thing right here set up for windmills and whatnot. Doesn't mean we're not building windmills, though. We're doing it other places, but we took a vote on it in this community, and we voted not to do it. And that's the kind of democracy. Like, we get a say, right? The government relies on us to know what's best, because we live here. And that's the kind of government that you want. Somebody that actually listens to you. But there would have been some pluses. Like, we would have gotten a deep dock, or whatever the fuck it's called. Like, for major ships. Like, we don't have that here. But we would have gotten it if we had agreed to it. But we didn't take it. Because it's not that important. But if we had that, we could import and export a lot easier. Right? But we elected not to do it, because fuck the money.
So, in addition to having the 7th largest installed hydroelectric capacity in the world, Norway already has the 18th largest installed wind capacity in the world as well, and has a massively untapped potential here that is only just starting to grow. So, in addition to having pretty large amounts of oil and gas, the country also has huge amounts of renewable energy potential as well, and they've been using that potential to their strategic advantage. They effectively keep all of their renewable hydro and wind resources in-house to meet their own energy demands indefinitely, which has freed them up to sell most of their oil and gas resources that they don't really need to outsiders abroad, and especially to the energy-hungry EU directly next door. And in addition to harnessing their local hydro, wind, and even geothermal potential to effectively turn their entire
Geothermal? That I don't know anything about. Geothermal? Really? Volcano? I don't know about that. I haven't heard shit about it. Geothermal? Where would that be? I have no idea. But apparently that's the thing too.
electric grid into 100% domestically produced renewables. They're also reducing the amount of fossil fuels their country consumes even further by offering generous tax and financial incentives to their citizens to adopt fully electric vehicles or EVs as well. As a result,
Yeah, electrical vehicles get off easier with like if you drive long distances, you have to pay a toll for bridges and whatnot. Some people have been questioning what the tolls are for. It's for the construction of bridges and ferry crossings and whatnot. That's what it's for, to run the ferries that we need so many of, and the tunnels too. Yeah, tunnels, bridges, and ferries. And they all cost money to make and whatnot. And the thing of it is, once it's been paid down, the tolls pretty much go away. Maybe absolutely, maybe greatly reduced. The great thing about tolls and whatnot, basically, you just run through it. You don't have to stop and pay. I like that. And if you're Norwegian, like, they'll bill you. So that's great. And if you're a local and you cross there many times, you get a reduction by buying a subscription. It goes without saying. It's nothing fancy, but yeah. I was thinking about something. Can't remember what it was, but something typical Norwegian. Yeah, you gotta try the local cuisine. It's meatballs and potatoes and gravy. Gravy. Gotta love the gravy. Yeah, what else can you say about Norway, really? It's groovy, like gravy.
Result, a whopping 88% of all new car sales in Norway across 2022 were EVs, which is by far the highest market share that EVs have yet achieved in any country in the world today. And since these pro-EV policies have been being pursued within Norway for a long time now, nearly 1 in every 3 vehicles on Norwegian roads are already EVs that don't consume any oil and are powered instead by the state's domestic and renewable hydro, wind, and geothermal resources. And for Norway, this is about far more than simply reducing emissions and combating climate change. It's also about national security and financial power. The more that the Norwegian electricity...
So there's the Prime Minister, the new one. I don't know what year this is, but yeah. It's later than the other lady.
Grid became powered by renewable sources from within Norway.
That's a funny little thing, though. Norway has always been equal, gender equal. Right? From Viking ages, right? Women would fight in the barricades and whatnot, and Norway's doing a great job in, providing equal pay for equal work, right? Regardless of gender. Thing that kind of bugs me, though, is that people don't understand why women get paid less. It's kind of a footnote here, but I mean, women have other priorities. Like, in a race, in a big company, right? You have all these people rushing in, trying to get the job, and 80% of them are male. 20% might be female, right? So the odds of getting a good paying job for a woman is less, because women have other priorities. Family and home and, different traits. Women are better at some things than men are. And, men are generally more muscular, and, so they're better at road work and stuff like that. So, yeah. I mean, it bugs me when people bring it up, because it's basically nonsense. Basically, at least in Norway. So, but on a global scale, like over in America, yeah, there's probably a little bit more difference there. But not in Norway. I wouldn't. You get what you get paid. But women generally take other kinds of jobs. So, yeah, that's a bit of nonsense, I think.
The more secure the country became from having to rely on foreign energy imports and supply chains, and the more of their own oil and gas resources they could sell abroad, and the more cash they could plow into their sovereign wealth fund to diversify their economy further away from oil. And the more EVs that get adopted within the country that can be indefinitely powered by their domestic renewable sources, then the even more of their domestic oil resources they won't need and can sell abroad as well to continue plowing even more money into the sovereign wealth fund, to diversify even more away from oil. It is a cascading strategy that has been diligently followed in Norway for decades, that is steadily
Yeah, for decades. Even before the oil came. So the oil is the main source of money, but it's not why we're so wealthy. It's not the reason behind it. The spending of the money is the key factor, right? Any country has a resource that they can take advantage of, like be it agriculture or be it wood or whatever it is, right? But the money always ends up in the wrong pockets. They're not distributed. That's the key thing. So when people say, oh yeah, Norway, they got all that oil money, I mean, it pisses me off, really. Like, you don't know what you're talking about, right? So shut up. Stop being a dickhead, right? You shouldn't speak on things you don't know about, and here I am doing it anyway. Like, there's a lot of things I don't know. But somebody's got to make a video, right? Fuck it.
transforming the country into one of, if not the, most powerful and influential states in Europe. It is thus Norway's unique 21st century philosophy and doctrine that its oil and gas resources are to be produced and sold to foreigners, while its renewable resources are to be harnessed and provided for the needs of the Norwegian people. This
Yeah. Keep the renewable shit in-house. Live off of it. Because that's what's going to sustain you. Right? Everything else, sell it off. Because either you make money off of it or you live a little bit more luxurious. We don't need more luxuries. Sustainability is way more important. We've known that for the last 12,000 years. Just saying, you know.
clever and unique strategy has set them up to be capable of selling and exporting virtually all of the oil and gas that they produce, while simultaneously being completely energy independent at the same time, which is how Norway's modest global oil and gas reserves and production levels take up so much more of the world's total exports, and how the country has gotten so spectacularly wealthy in the process. The results of all of this prudence and decades of forward-looking strategic thinking all culminated in 2022 after the Russians decided to invade Ukraine. In the aftermath...
Okay, here we go. Ukrainian war and how it's affecting the economy in Norway. And, yeah. That said, though, we're supporting Ukraine, just to make that clear, and we're sending off a lot of equipment and money and whatnot. We're supporting them a lot, you know, considering we're only 5 million people over here, you know. But yeah, we definitely don't want Russia winning, because fuck them. They started this war, right? Who the fuck do they think they are? Which brings me back to World War II, thinking, you know, Germany, when they did all that, why the hell didn't Europe divide Germany and just claim the land? Because, you know, fuck them. Like, that's what I'm thinking about Russia too, right? We should just, you know, you got Europe in a box. It's basically a box, right? You cut off Russia right there at the end, right, where Europe starts, and you just tell them to fuck off, and you divide the rest among the countries in the EU, because screw them. They don't belong here. Like, that's what I want to do. I'm not saying it's a wise thing to do, but, you know, you don't want to piss off the nuclear giant, because they're real big on threats over there. But yeah, getting them to fuck off would be excellent. Just back the fuck off. You have no fucking right. Grow up. You know, stop ruining sandcastles all over the place. Like, what's the fucking point? Huh? What's that gonna achieve? I mean, Russia has so much space, it can't even control what it's got. Like, the military is a fucking joke. Anything. Ugh, like, it's just all about the nukes. That's it. It's the only fucking thing they got. If they didn't have the nukes, they'd be overrun a long time ago. Yeah, they would not be mouthing off, and if they did, they get taught a lesson. Yeah. So, shut up, Russia.
Aftermath of triggering the biggest war in Europe since World War II, the European Union decided to begin shutting down their previously massive imports of Russian oil and gas in order to deny the Kremlin its primary source of funding for their war machine attempting to overrun Ukraine. But of course, the EU had to quickly find somebody else to begin replacing Russia's previously large shares of 25% of their oil imports and 45% of their gas imports. And Norway, with its big oil and gas resources right nearby and its friendly relations, was the best positioned country in the world to take advantage of the situation and fill in the demand. Consequently, exports of Norwegian oil by tankers, gas through pipelines, and even liquefied gas or LNG by tankers all began surging towards the EU market to replace the Russians, with Norway's overall share of EU oil imports rising from 9.5% just before the war to 13.3% in the first quarter of 2023.
Okay, so 2023, the Norwegian export rised to 13? Yeah, okay. So 2021, Russia would have 25%, Norway would have 10%. And then Russia went down to 2% because everybody boycotted them, and then Norway took over, giving them 4% more. Right. So, we're filling the gaps.
Which makes Norway currently the EU's single largest provider of oil. Norway's share of the EU's imported piped gas also skyrocketed upwards from 38.1% just before the war to a whopping 46.1% in the first quarter of 2023.
I'm not sure what you said there. Just me and numbers. I can't keep up. I need it written down or something. I'm not too great at listening, basically. But, yeah. Gas, almost 50%. Yeah, used to be Russia with their 40%. Yeah, but they're down to 13 now. I'm not sure. I think it's Germany that's gulping up the Russian gas and whatnot. I think because they need it. They're so heavily invested in resources, oil and gas. I don't know. I'm speaking out of my ass here, but...
While Norway's share of the EU's imported LNG rose from basically nothing just before the invasion to 6.6% in Q1 of 2023.
LNG, liquid nitrogen gas? Is that it? Is that LNG? The big tankers? Gas tankers? I think that's it. Fits, right?
The bloc's fifth largest provider of LNG now overall. And at the same time as Norway's oil and gas export volumes to a suddenly desperate EU were rapidly rising, the global prices of oil and gas were each rapidly rising right alongside them. The result of this situation caused by Russia has been an absolute financial bonanza for the Norwegians, the likes of which has never before been seen.
Yeah, so because of what Russia did, everybody's suffering, the entire European, but Norwegians are just flourishing because we're picking up the slack and we're supporting EU. EU. Yeah, because, we're great. I mean, seriously, we'll back up Europe, when needed and whatnot. But we do like staying neutral most of the time. Yeah. I mean, the only thing, Scandinavian countries are pretty tight together, we're pretty close and whatnot, right? But just being friendly with the other European nations is very important. Yeah, it is. Like, if you look at America, you'd think they would have a close tie to Mexico, right? But I've never seen the Mexican government shake hands with, but maybe you have, I don't know. It's halfway across the world. Funny thing about US that just tickles me, their Navy has, what is it, 11 carrier groups versus China's 2. I think Russia has 2. And the rest might have 1. But US has 11. Now that's a lot of money just tossed down the fucking drain, don't you think? Don't you have enough guns? Like, what the fuck are you doing? If you're wondering why you're so fucking poor, that's why. I don't know the numbers. Maybe it's not that high compared to something else. But yeah, a lot of that money could be spent, educating people. Stuff like that. It's something to think about. I'm not saying what to do, but it's definitely something to think about. You don't need 11 carrier groups when the biggest threat you've got have 2. And you're halfway across the world from pretty much everybody else. But the tiny little speck of Mexico that actually connects to you, you can't protect it. I mean, where's the goddamn wall that guy, offered? Like, it's insane. Let's not start at anything. So yeah. Other than that, though, I've been to America. It's a very nice place. Yeah. People are a bit weird, though. I will say that. Very loud, especially when they visit other places. Yeah, loud, a bit obnoxious. Fairly fat. And the food over there, it's great. Tastes great. Really does. Because you got people all coming in from all over the world with all kinds of different cultures, and you just, you try to make the best out of it. So, you pour some syrup on it, some sugar, and woo, you got great stuff. It's not healthy, though. Really not healthy.
The country pulled in a whopping $112.3 billion in revenue from their oil and gas industry in 2022 alone, and then immediately shattered that record with another $131 billion in oil and gas revenue across 2023, compared to a relatively paltry $29 billion in oil and gas revenue that they earned before the war and the energy crisis in 2021. Norway's oil and gas revenue in 2023 alone was roughly equivalent to the entire collective GDP of Slovakia, and they've been utilizing their sudden windfall very wisely. They have invested enormous amounts of it into the Sovereign Wealth Fund, and tens of billions of dollars more are being invested to explore for even further untapped oil and gas deposits.
So 130 billion a year, which go into the fund, right? But the prices are still rising. I thought that was 230, not 130, so that would have taken about 5 years to double the fund. But yeah, we'll see. But yeah, definitely making bank on it. This will quickly go to 2 trillion. That's for sure. So that's like 30%. Is that 30%? Anyway.
Deposits that could be found within Norway's far northern Barents Sea that still remains largely unexplored. More pipelines are being built to Europe to
Hey, you know what? I got this coin. The Russian ruble. Yeah. I don't know what year it was given out, but it was, there's something about Svalbard on it, and Russia doesn't own Svalbard. It's Norwegian. So that got distracted. I got that coin. Yeah, I got the whole set. Got it from my uncle. It's pretty cool. Yeah. Illegal coins. By a Russian. Yeah.
expand their export capacity even further, and to replace the Russians' previous market share even further. Norway's increasing displacement of Russia in the European energy market was perhaps best symbolized in September of 2022. On the 27th of that month, a series of bombs detonated underwater, destroying sections of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 natural gas pipelines that connected German factories and homes directly to Russia's huge natural gas fields in Siberia.
Who the hell bombed that? There's not a war going on over here. What's going on over here? Who's bombing those things? I don't know. I don't have a TV. Certainly don't look at news. But yeah, that should help.
Both pipelines were rendered completely inoperable by the sabotage, destroying Russia's ability to directly export gas to Germany. And then, the very next day afterwards,
So the Russian pipelines are fucked up. Who would do that? Was it Ukraine? Or was it somebody else? Who did that? Was it a joint effort to just... It wouldn't be, would it? No. What the fuck? I don't know. You should have said who it was.
Norwegians and the Poles inaugurated the opening of the Baltic Pipe, Norway's brand new gas pipeline to Poland that will replace all of the roughly 60% of Poland's natural gas imports that had been coming from Russia with Norwegian gas instead.
Ah, Poland. Are they connected to Russia kind of heavily, you know? Maybe. Yeah. I'm looking at you, Poland. What are you doing? Take a side already.
Norway has therefore emerged in the 2020s as the European Union's largest single supplier of energy, and in the future it isn't likely to be limited to oil and gas exports either. In the future, as climate change progresses, it's expected that precipitation levels in Scandinavia will actually increase further than what they're like today, which will mean that even more water will be feeding into Norway's rivers that cascade down the mountains toward the west coast. While Norway's still largely untapped wind potential is expected to be expanded to make the country a global leader in wind energy as well. Norway, like...
I wonder. There's nobody living up north. Couldn't we just wind it out? Make a fuck ton of power there? Probably not good for the nature, whatnot. There shouldn't be too many birds there. Basically, penguins are in the Arctics, not up there. Seals and bears, polar bears. Basically, right? A lot of fish, but with some birds, yeah. But it's pretty far north. I mean, there is a whole island there, uninhabited, pretty much. I don't know. Is it 500 people there? I think general population 500. Like, there's a lot of potential there, but it's bad for the environment, isn't it? So we don't do it. I don't know, something like that, maybe, possibly. Probably a good reason if we haven't done it. Yeah.
Likely won't need all of this excess renewable hydro and wind power for just itself in the future. And so the possibility has already been raised of building out transmission lines from Norway to the EU so that the Norwegians can export their hydro and wind-sourced energy to Europe in addition to their oil and gas resources.
There is the cold. Maybe that's the reason. Driving wind turbines in the cold, maybe it's not the easiest. You need somebody to look after them too. Yeah.
And besides transforming into Europe's most significant energy province, Norway will also likely become one of Europe's and the Western world's largest sources of mineral and rare earth might as well. It's well known by now that the global push toward a green energy transition, which is being largely spearheaded by European economies, will require vast amounts of metals and rare earth elements to keep itself going. Rare earths especially are vital materials that are necessary for EV batteries, smartphones, wind turbines, digital cameras, hard drives, and tons of other things that are vital for powering modern 21st century life and growth.
Yeah. Earth minerals. Electricity. Closely related. There is the debate that like the fucking batteries you have in the mobile phones are not they're bad for the environment, right? Polluting. whatnot. Maybe more than carbon emissions are. But it is definitely the way forward, and we're all relying on technology. I mean, just look at the screen right there. So, it's a big deal, you know, earth minerals. It's an important part of the world's sustainability and whatnot, technology, you know, where we can't go to Mars without technology. Let's just look at that for a second, you know. That'll be interesting though, going to Mars. Holy shit. That'll be very interesting.
Unfortunately, though, for Europe and the Western world, the vast majority of the world's proven rare earth reserves are currently dominated by China.
I'm guessing that's the China King Kong leader. What's he called? Emperor? I don't know. Used to be emperor. Might be minister now. I don't know. Leader, anyway. I'm guessing that's him. So yeah, they're supplying all the electronics. That's why everything is made in China. Isn't it? Yeah. They're pretty big on electronics over there.
China conducts an overwhelming 63% of all the rare earth mining in the world.
That's a lot of earth mining. Like 63%? Holy shit, boys. You got it made. No wonder you're doing so well with so many people. I'm not too familiar with China, but I think most of these parts are not inhabited very much. I don't know if that's in because they're too cold. I think the majority of people are down here. I'm not too sure, really. I haven't done any research into it. Probably should,
which is more than every other country combined. And China conducts an even more overwhelming 85% of all the world's rare earth processing.
So the processing is in China. That too. Big industries right there. Major industries. Like, that is the future. And if I remember correctly, they're threatening to cut people off from that source. Are they? Let's find out.
China controls roughly a third of the planet's proven rare earth reserves, followed up by Vietnam, Russia, and Brazil. After which, there's a huge gap before Australia comes next, lagging far behind any of the top four. And China has already been weaponizing its dominance over these rare earth resources as well, in a similar way to how Russia weaponizes its dominance over oil and gas. In July of 2023, China declared that they were introducing new export restrictions on two metals that are critical for the manufacturing of semiconductors, gallium and germanium. In retaliation,
Semiconductors. What are those? Semiconductors. Half conductors. I mean, conductors is electricity. CPUs and shit like that? Probably.
to US economic sanctions on China's semiconductor industry. China currently produces 98% of the world's gallium and 68% of the world's germanium. So if China decides you can't have them, you effectively just can't. And although neither gallium nor germanium are rare earth metals, they are nonetheless also still critical to powering modern digital life. And so China's export restrictions on them were meant as a clear threat that additional metals and minerals that China dominates could become restricted in the future as well.
See, that's the thing about Russia and China. They got one guy in charge. What the fuck? I mean, for fuck's sakes. It's not gonna work. Take a lesson from Russia. Jesus Christ, man. How can you be that dumb? There's like 1.2 billion people, and you can't tell this one guy to fuck off. You know? That's hilarious. Why would you let him in power? I mean, he's probably doing a lot of great things for the country and running it smoothly and whatnot. But still, it's a major threat. mean, just look at World War II, right? Look what he did. And now they're weaponizing their resources and whatnot. Yeah, well, it's their resources. They got a right to it, but it's still a lousy thing to do. You know.
But it was around that same time that a company called Norge Mining in Norway suddenly made a surprise announcement in June of 2023. They had just about out of nowhere discovered by far the largest reserve of phosphate rock ever found in the world. And it was just sitting there in southern Norway this whole time.
Yep. Phosphate. Largest deposit in the world. Right there, in Norway. Now, we could weaponize it. Couldn't we? Yeah. We could do that. We could hoard it. I mean, we could. Yeah. I don't think the vote is in on how to extract this because it's going to fuck with the environment. So the government needs time to figure out how they're going to extract it. Meanwhile, it's just sitting there. Because the government doesn't know how to safely extract it. So they're not doing anything. They could just spend it all, just flush it all on the market and devastate everything around it, but they're not going to do that. So I'm guessing we'll see small drilling, excavating things in the future, and then as we learn from our mistakes and how to do it right and whatnot, you know, try to avoid casualties and stuff like that. Do it safely and export it properly and utilize it, maybe manufacture some shit. Yeah, it's gonna take some time, but we'll do it in the best way we can so that we get the best profits out of it. The best, not necessarily the most, but we're gonna preserve the land as much as we can. I know that. But yeah, there's going to be some holes down here.
The company has since estimated that this deposit contains around 70 billion tons of economically recoverable phosphate, which literally in a flash doubled the entire world's previously proven reserves of phosphate that had sat at 71 billion tons beforehand.
Yep, doubled it. Which means we control half of it. It's an even split. Well, technically, we got one more across, though, don't we? Yeah. But yeah, half of it. So China, you should play a bit nicer. You know, just a little bit, maybe. I mean, if you wanna get some money out of it. Otherwise, when you go run out, we might be sitting on it still, not using it. Because the government, it will take whatever fucking time it needs. They might start extracting it like a little bit at a time and whatnot. Or they might wait 20 years until they know what they're doing. Yeah.
Put another way, this recent Norwegian discovery is so vast that it can supply the entire world's demand for phosphate all on its own for the next half a century to come. And it completely
50 years. Alright. They can supply for 50 years. So, in total, that's 100 years. That's the supply we have on planet Earth. Thus far known to us, you know. That's interesting.
undermines the previous dominance over phosphate that was up to then enjoyed by Morocco, who controls an estimated 50 billion tons of the resource that equaled about 70% of the world's proven reserves before June of 2023, and then was cut down a size by half to only about 35% of the world's proven reserves after the discovery in Norway.
So Morocco, not China? I'm a bit confused now, but I don't need to. You probably caught up, right? As long as you get it.
To Norway's gigantic discovery, it was Morocco and China who were the largest producers of phosphates, and they dominated the global market for it. Okay. Phosphates are really important because they're a critical component used in fertilizer and global food chains. And in smaller quantities, they're also similarly used to produce digital devices and EV batteries. And
EV batteries, digital devices, but mainly fertilizer. I mean, it's good for food, so that's nice. I don't know. I'm not a chemist. Well,
Norway mining still isn't finished either. They believe that their huge phosphate discovery in southern Norway also contains huge amounts of metals like titanium and vanadium as well. Metals that are vital for the construction of everything from aircraft to computers and submarines and more. At the moment, the production of both metals are dominated by China, who produces roughly 36% of the world's titanium and more than half of the world's vanadium, while vanadium's production is further 99% dominated by the BRICS countries, with virtually all of the world's production of the metal happening in China, Russia, South Africa, and Brazil.
So there might be more down there as well. I mean, this oil fund is really looking great right now. I mean, just being Norwegian, yeah. I'm thinking I should buy some property down there. I might hit the jackpot, you know. Maybe I'll just, yeah, that'd be fun.
This has meant that for a very long time, the US and the EU have each had to rely on geopolitically tenuous supply chains for their access to these raw materials that are vital to continue building airplanes and submarines and computers. And China's export restrictions on germanium and gallium show that China could, in the future, decide on introducing even harsher export restrictions on titanium and vanadium as well. Norway's probable massive amounts of both titanium and
If I've been off screen because I'm leaning too much, I'm sorry. It's very unprofessional, but yeah, that's just the way it is.
vanadium could end up granting Europe and the West their strategic autonomy from China, if Norway mining delivers, while Norway is also now set to become the world's newest largest source of phosphates. This ultimately means that, in addition to becoming Europe's largest source of oil and gas and a major source of renewable energy, Norway is also primed to become Europe's largest source of many of the rare earth materials that are crucial for modern technologies, the green energy transition, and agriculture. And Norway is completely undermining the previous dominance in all of these.
Yeah, completely undermining, dominating. This is Bergen, by the way. You have the pier right here. You have old Bergen in the back there, and yeah. Yeah, this is where the boats come in. Right here. Like this one, passenger ferry. Wait. Why are you parked over there? You're supposed to be over here. What the fuck? I guess this is a different route. Yeah, they usually park over here. What the fuck? They've been doing that for the last 40 years. Anyway, there's an old sea vessel over there. Statsråd Lamkul. Is that his name? Yeah, I think it is. Yeah. You can catch a ride on that, actually. Sadly, though, you won't get to use the sails, which is, why don't people sail anymore? It's so fun, Just in general, basically. I mean, there's a lot of sailboats around here. Never seen any sails. Yeah, must be the harsh climate. Yeah, got a little bit of industry. All the tugboats and whatnot, they're parking over here. And then you got the cruise ship, which is parked over here. Yeah, a couple of cruise ships can park over here. Going to Denmark and England and whatnot. Yeah. This is Bergen. Well, part of it anyway. If you're wondering where Fløyen is, it's right over here, yonder, this way. 7 mountains surrounding Bergen.
Industries in Europe that have previously been enjoyed by more autocratic powers like Russia and China. Norway is providing the Europeans with the ability to rely more on the most democratic country in the world for their raw materials, and less on their historically large autocratic providers like Russia, Algeria, Libya, Azerbaijan, and the Gulf states. Which means that Norway is probably only—
That's the royal family, in case you were confused. That's the king to come. Yeah, right there. That's her son? I don't know. That's the queen. Oh, yeah. So there's the present king. Yeah. Getting a bit old, but
only going to continue growing richer and richer by expanding their sovereign wealth fund even further, to dominate more of the global stock and bond markets while expanding its tax incentives, to completely electrify their vehicles and grid even further so that they can keep selling more oil and gas to Europe to continue fueling their sovereign wealth fund. Norway has basically discovered the geopolitical equivalent of the infinite money glitch.
Yeah, this is up north. Don't know exactly where, but it's up north. Yeah. Little fishing village stuff like down here and whatnot. It's very representative. Yeah.
And they've wisely set themselves up for generations of prosperity for every Norwegian citizen for years to come. Now, there's a lot of data that goes into producing these kinds of videos. Whether it's showing how Norway and Russia compete for the oil and gas market in Europe, what Norway's wind and hydroelectric potentials look like, how Norway's small populations
Bunad. Yeah. Here. All kinds of, what's it called? National dress? You know, on our Independence Day, we dress up and, yeah, we go out in these clothes, you know. Celebrate. Wave our flags around, eat some hot dogs. Have some fun. Games for kids and whatnot. So, yeah. A lot of variety depending on where in Norway you're from. Like, this is the northern one. And I wonder if this is the Bergen one. This, I don't know, this should be Bergen. Unless I'm completely, could be Mole, I don't know. But yeah, you got green, blue, black, red, yeah, all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
stacks up against larger city-states, or showing how China dominates the rare earth metals industry. The ability to visualize raw data like this on the map is exactly what makes learning this stuff so fascinating to me. And it's why the Exploring Data Visually course is one of my favorite courses that I've ever taken with this video sponsor, Brilliant. Brilliant is a STEM learning platform that helps you learn by actually doing.
Okay, that's it. Bam. Okay, we're done. Damn. Let's see here. If I'm leaning like this, yeah, I'm halfway off the fucking screen. That's just so unprofessional. Anyway, what else can I tell you about Norway? It's very snowy right now. Yeah. So, yeah. We're supposed to get a lot of rain, so that's more power. Why am I just lean off screen with that shit? Nobody needs to see your mug. Yeah. Anyway, that's that. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like if you did. There's gonna be some comments and whatnot. Hopefully they're nice. There's gonna be some corrections, so you might want to skim through the comments and see. But then there are people with comments that, you know, opinions and whatnot that won't be correct. So, yeah. With a grain of salt, take it in. Yeah. But, yeah, lumber and fish. That's what started it all. And then hydroelectrics, and then oil, and then phosphate in the future. So we're looking at a lot of money. Anyway.